Hey, Catherine.
I'm not sure what's going on.
Hey, Catherine.
Hey, am I? Okay, maybe it's working. It was acting crazy.
Yeah, you came in as a panelist. I changed you into a when you came in you came in as an attendee. I changed you to a panelist, so you're good. You're here.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
You're welcome.
Something was acting crazy. My internet was acting up all week sometimes.
I understand. That's why I come to the office on these meeting days. It makes it easier.
Yeah, my grandchildren were here last week and everybody had phones using internet, I think. I don't know what it was. Something was
Oh,
crazy.
you know it. They would die if they were separated from social media.
I know it. And so I guess it was too much for my, I guess it was too much for my internet or something. It was acting up.
Could be.
I printed all this stuff out because I said I may not even have an internet and I wasn't sure.
So far, it's just us.
Okay.
There's Jenny.
What happened that time? Okay.
Hey, everybody.
Oh, hi. How are you, Karen?
I'm good.
Yeah. It's a beautiful day outside.
Oh, my goodness, those red buds are just gorgeous.
Yeah, beautiful.
You have a lovely drive down 29, Catherine.
Good.
Yeah.
But something happened to my screen. Lisa, did it go out?
You're still there. I can see you.
Okay. It shut down, said launch meeting, but I'm scared to click it. Yes, wait a minute. I'll be right back.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, my picture went. So what did I?
We can see you, Catherine.
You can see us?
Uh-huh. And I
I
can,
can't see you. So shall I click on this thing said launch meeting?
well, you're already launched.
Well, I don't know what it's doing.
Can
I
you,
can't see.
you can hear me?
I can hear you, but I don't see you.
That's too bad.
I think you should hit that launch meeting or try to get out and come back in maybe
Well,
if you can't see us, because you'll be able to see if they share their screen and stuff.
I think that's a good idea to go out and come back in.
wait a minute. It keeps popping up. Like when I go out, I probably won't be able to come back in. That's what happened to me before.
What do you see?
Just says open Zoom meeting, a launch meeting below.
What happens when you click on that?
Join a new meeting, leave and rejoin.
Okay, so I think what happens is you're actually on the meeting 2 times. I actually did the very same thing on Sunday. So
Leave and join.
click leave that meeting, and I think you'll be on the where we see you now, or not. Oh, I hope she can get back in.
I hope so too.
Have we heard from anybody, Lisa, that they won't be able to be here?
No, nobody has said they were not coming. All right, look, I got 2 attendees. Okay, Catherine's coming back. And then Sarah Davis, I'm letting her in too. Okay, so Sarah and Catherine should pop up.
So Lisa,
Yes,
on Catherine's square, wait, hold on. So Catherine, you're on mute.
Hi, everybody. I didn't speak to Phyllis.
All right. Good
Okay, is that working?
Yeah. Can you see us now?
I can see you guys now. I
Excellent.
think my internet been acting up all week, so it might do anything. At least all last week.
All right. So we're waiting for Amy and Mary. We haven't heard about a replacement for Ray, right?
No, and I was emailing with Travis today, so he said he was waiting, he'd given an application to somebody and we were waiting on them to send it back.
Doug, this is in regards to Supervisor Price's representative. Ray moved to Fluvanna County, so she can't be. So we're trying to see if Supervisor Price is gonna reappoint somebody.
Yeah, well, I'm sure she will. Yeah. Thank you. You look great, by the way, Phyllis.
Just everyone know I'm not the victim of domestic violence. Just a really painful root canal.
Yeah.
Oh, no. Oh, I knew somebody else who had that. It was the whole side of their face.
I figured I might as well go there, Phyllis, since you and I had the conversation yesterday. So
Thank you. I would have said something.
yeah,
because-
just takes the questions away.
Yep. Actually, somebody today thought it looked like, you know how some headphones have the mic that kind of comes.
That's what I thought. I thought it was a mic down there. I didn't even notice.
I'm
till
I'm
we
sorry, Phyllis. Maybe you could have gotten away with it. I'm sorry.
said- Do you want me to wait another minute or two, Phyllis?
Do we have a quorum? Lisa, do we have a quorum?
1, 2, 3. No, we do not. We need at least 4.
Well, maybe what we could do is just go ahead and start with any questions about the informational items, since that doesn't really need a quorum.
Okay. I guess if anyone has questions, or I think it worked nicely the last couple times, Phyllis, if you have things you wanted to point out or say, to add any clarification to anything, sometimes that answers questions people might have anyway. So
Sure.
either way, yeah.
Let's see. I think that the item from the Family Preservation Unit is particularly noteworthy. I think the work that all of our Child Welfare Division has done in terms of family engagement, family finding has been quite remarkable. Let's see, under the self-sufficiency team news, the temporary income limit increase for parents of children ages 5 and under is I think the prediction is that we're going to see a market increase in applications. And just as a side note, we may even have applications from our own staff who now might meet income requirements. And so my administration news was just to kind of confirm that Stacy Pethia, who is our housing policy manager, is now part of DSS. I have to say I'm learning all sorts of things about community development block grant and just all different things about affordable housing policy. So, but we're excited about that. So I really didn't have anything in particular to highlight. If you wanted to, I could ask Doug to give us an update on the director recruitment process, if that would be helpful.
I
Yeah,
can do
think
that.
that would be great.
Sure, I can do that. It's a very quick update. We have been active the last several weeks doing the extensive preliminary work with surveys. You may have seen some of that with focus groups, with some meetings with staff, all intended to develop the profile, the position profile, which is more than just the job description. The more I guess meaningful aspect of the profile, it's all those attributes that that you look for during the recruitment process. And so it really helps us as we are speaking to those potential candidates, so that ideally they see themselves in the attributes, as well as in the description of the department and some some information about Albemarle County itself. And so it becomes a recruiting piece first, and then we use the attributes to develop our questions for our panels. So it becomes look fors, and so we kind of do a cross reference between what we say that we want in attributes, what the candidates who apply say that they bring to the table as relates to those attributes, and then what we see through the process, through the interviewing process as that goes. So our next steps this week, I don't think it's close to being out on the street. I don't think, Phyllis, it's out yet. I've not seen it out. You may know if it's out or not. It's awfully close. Like any day.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I know it was, Lorna was eager to get it out like on Friday or
Yeah.
Monday, but I haven't gotten a confirmation.
Okay, so it is close to being out. We would expect it to run for about 30 days. We do have a long list of places to send it to that then we think put us in the best position to recruit a highly qualified, diversified candidate pool. What the interview team will do now, it's Lorna and myself, Siri Russell, some of you may know Siri, Daphne Kaiser with the schools, and Lauren Hawkins in HR, will develop then the rest of the process, which likely would include not just telephone interviews and screening, but also a technique that we use that we call triads, where we'll pull together, I think I might have mentioned this before, we'll pull together some key stakeholders and put them in groups of 3. And so we have like a round robin type of process. So we'll do a variety of different things in order to put us in the best position to allow the candidates that we think best meet the attributes to show their stuff. That's a very kind of a broad way of characterizing it. That's probably the best that I can offer at this point. We're not in a huge hurry. We're not trying to do it fast. We're trying to do it well. I probably said that before also. And part of that is, as much as we don't really we want to minimize a gap with Phyllis's departure, the organization, the agency is so strong that there's really not an urgency to try to make sure there isn't one with Mary and Alice and Wanda and all of the leaders there. There's just not a lot for us to worry about other than effectively making a transition and hiring the best candidate. So that's what I have to say. Again, glad to answer any questions if there are any, but we'll certainly keep you posted as we move forward.
Thanks, Doug.
Sure.
I think
Did anyone have any questions? Oh, I see that. Did anyone have questions about what Doug had to say? No. So let's go back, since we have a quorum, and we can approve our minutes from our March meeting. If everyone had a chance to review those. If someone wants to make a motion.
I make a motion to approve the minutes.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
And any opposed? I don't see anyone, so we'll approve the March minutes. And then let's jump back to the information items and see if anyone had any questions outside of what Phyllis had
Who
covered.
seconded?
Catherine.
Thank you.
Any questions about the info items?
Amy, did you have any questions?
I'm just
Sorry.
wondering, what are you anticipating for next year for Bright Stars? is there any, is there the plan to be in person or,
They're already partly in person,
yeah,
at whatever stage it is. So they just follow, the rest of the school guidelines. They don't operate separately from that.
okay.
So right now, I think the parents have a choice, and I think the kids have certain days that they're assigned to. Maybe you all who have kids in the schools would know better than I do.
Any other questions? I don't see anybody. Phyllis, do you want to lead us into introductions and we can
Absolutely.
start with the presentation? Great, thank you.
So Sarah, are you able to see us yet?
Yes.
Oh,
I can
good.
see everyone now.
Well, I am greatly pleased to introduce Sarah Davis. But it's also bittersweet because Sarah will be leaving us soon. I can't remember when your last day is, but it's it's in the near future.
Friday.
Friday.
What?
Yeah,
Oh, come on.
that's one of those requisitions you gave me permission to fill.
Okay.
And so I know it was horrible of me to ask her to do this while she's trying to wrap up, but I very much wanted you all to hear from her because she's done an amazing job over the last couple years managing our adoption program. As you know, I used to supervise foster care and adoption, and I do not recognize the program and what's required in the process. So I know some of you know that Karen Horridge was the senior adoption worker at the city. And so I tell you, Karen, you're going to be flabbergasted when you
When I was reading it, it was like, is this the same program that I did?
Right, exactly. So, so yeah, I'm really pleased that Sarah was willing to do this. And so what I asked her to do is just share a little bit about kind of the process for what our requirements are and what goes into finalizing an adoption. You all hear at the info items the numbers of adoptions that are finalized in any given month. But I dare say I would imagine you don't have any clue about how complex the process is. So before I turn it over to you, Sarah, I'm going to ask the board members to introduce themselves. And what I like to do also is board members, if you can indicate what district you're from so that Sarah can kind of connect the dots. And so I'll just go across my screen. Karen.
Karen Harridge from the Jack Jewett District with Diantha.
And Jenny.
I'm Jenny Moore and I represent the Whitehall District, and Ann Malik's the supervisor.
And Catherine.
And Catherine Burton from the Sammy Miller District with Liz Palmer tonight for the supervisor.
And Amy.
Amy Lawfer, Ravenna with B, Lepisto.
And Supervisor McKeel.
You were so kind to always include me. I'm Diantha McKeel, Board of Supervisor member from the Jack Jewett District. Karen and I are teammates here, and occasionally. So I appreciate you letting me join you and listen. Thanks.
And you know Doug, but Doug, you want to introduce yourself again?
Sure. Doug Walker, Deputy County Executive. Thanks.
All right, Sarah, let me know how I can help you, and we're excited to hear all the great stuff you have to share.
Oh my goodness. Hopefully you guys enjoy it. It's a lot of information, so I have done my best. I will start looking this way. I have 2 monitors, so until I get set up, like that's what I'm doing. But hopefully this gives you a good sense of some of what our workers have to do and brings alive the adoption process, maybe in a different way that you've seen or heard before. So let me make sure. Can you all see my screen?
We can.
Now, great. So you all have gotten teeny tiny for me, so I apologize if I can't read the room really well.
If you have questions, my best suggestion is, interrupt me, please. It will probably be easier to field those as I go along. But if I can't see you, please just feel free to step up, or somebody say, whoa, give me a minute.
So Sarah, what we see is a small slide, and then I think your notes page. Is that what we're supposed to see?
It's doing that because I'm on a double monitor. Hold on a second. Let me see if it will.
If you click on from beginning up there, will that?
Yeah, so it's gonna put it on my one, but you're still seeing my notes, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
And not that that's a problem. I just didn't know if that's what you wanted us to.
No, let me see if I can't get to, now you get to see my little guy for a minute. Systems. Oh, which one's which? All right, what do you all see now?
Just a smaller version of, and the slide is really small, and then your notes is in large font.
All right, let me get out of here. Do you see my presentation background now? Sorry, guys.
Yeah, we see the slideshow as, before one, and now we see the slideshow with the notes.
Okay, I don't know how to make this bigger and do it from this format.
Oh, there you go. Bingo.
Got it?
You got it.
Okay, cool. I don't mind if you all see my notes. I just have a lot of them to keep me organized, so this will be easier. So yeah, what I'm here today to talk about is achieving permanency through adoption. As you probably saw, Phyllis had some great suggestions on content that sort of guided how I put this together. And I will end with some visuals so you get to see some of our kiddos whom we've had permission to share their pictures and their first names. So that's exciting and a taste of what's to come. So what I want to sort of cover today are these 9 steps and elements essentially. And just want to say and highlight that the process really starts when a child enters foster care. We need to be considering the possibility of an adoption outcome from day one. Not because that's our primary focus, because return home is always where we start, but so that we can be prepared if adoption ends up being the outcome for a case. Our preparation impacts how smoothly the process goes, how long it takes, the adoptee at finalization, and then throughout the lifespan. So we need to be considering placement. There's a lot of preparation work that goes into a successful adoption. There are some policy and formality steps that obviously need to be taken in terms of a goal change family partnership meeting, the termination of parental rights process, which we'll talk about, the fiscal side of things, which is very much behind the scenes in the adoption subsidy process and the negotiation that goes on beyond that. Post-termination, so that's what TPR stands for, and preparing finalization is a tricky window of a case. You have finalization, and then I also wanted to take a minute to highlight that there's this whole world post-adoption. This department's obligation and work and support of families does not stop once an adoption is finalized. So sort of using that roadmap, in order to achieve an adoption goal, there has to be a termination of parental rights, which severs the legal ties between biological parents and their child that frees a child or a youth to be adopted. And so we really have an obligation and a duty to prepare everyone that touches the case for this possibility. That involves using the word adoption, that when you have a case, a bio parent can be really triggered and activated just by thinking about adoption. We have to talk about the potential for adoption to be a possibility. And it really requires and challenges workers to focus on concurrent planning and really getting comfortable in uncomfortable situations. I say that a lot to my team. We say that a lot in foster care, period. And so when I reference sort of that discomfort, I would challenge you all to really consider what it might be like to have to tell a biological parent that you, because they see it as you, not the department, it is you, the worker, the face of the agency, that you're pursuing a goal change to adoption, and that it would mean that their child isn't coming home to them and would be permanently adopted into another family. It's one of the most difficult conversations to have in my perspective, and having done it, I will say it's really emotional and hard, even when you have a good relationship with biological family and extended biological family. So after sort of those preparatory conversations, you do need to make sure that our workers hold the family partnership meetings prior to a permanency planning hearing in a court proceeding. And so that's the forum to really discuss the strengths and the needs and why adoption needs to be pursued from the department's perspective. It's our opportunity to solicit input from our team as well. You have foster parents, CASAs, GALs, service providers, parents, children, the youth themselves. But this shouldn't be the first time that a family is hearing about the possibility of a goal of adoption. So part of this process you'll see is explaining the TPR process, which I will highlight in a subsequent slide. And so we have an obligation to say, like, how did we get here? What does TPR actually mean? And what that process is going to look like. So there are two main ways we get to TPR, which then frees a child to be adopted. The first is a permanent entrustment. And that's essentially when birth parents agree to sign over their parental rights and allow the department to place their child for adoption. And Phyllis signs off on those permanent entrustments when those are executed and they're notarized documents. So there's a lot of honor and respect when biological parents give permission for their kids to be adopted and to be okay where they are. And so what we have an obligation to do there, and I'm going to use that obligation, duty, whatever, best practice, we really do have a responsibility to make sure adoptees also understand their adoption journey and why their bio parents either agreed to this decision or didn't agree to this decision, right? So when you don't have sort of that voluntary agreement and that consensus, the case can go towards an involuntary termination of parental rights. And basically that's a trial process. That's a court proceeding, which again, I'll highlight in just a little bit. When it comes to working a foster care case, knowing adoption could be the outcome, what I'm really meaning is a call to workers to keep in mind what would be needed at the end of a case, at the start of a case. It's really difficult when you're working reunification to sort of hold this lens about what the adoption process might require. That could be a year down the road, could be 2 years down the road. So it's critical to really gather information when you have family at the table at the start of the case, especially from biological parents, because you will need that information later in the adoption process. So, you know, from a logistics standpoint, generally when kids come into care, you have a lot of people at the table. As a case progresses or we veer from that return home option, you can have families start to disengage. So we have to maximize our opportunity at the beginning of a case. A quick example of sort of why we approach it that way and having to keep the adoptee's perspective in mind comes to visitation. So visitation is a routine part of a foster care case, right? Often bio parents are visiting either once a week with their kiddos or multiple times per week. And so we have to remind our team to make sure, like, we snap pictures. We talking to these biological parents about their likes, their dislikes, their family culture, their traditions, and what their hopes and their dreams are. Because if we don't, and we get to TPR, there could be potential, especially for infants and kiddos 4 and under who may not have the same kind of memories of being in their family of origin as, say, a 10-year-old who comes into foster care, could end up with no pictures of their biological family. So can you imagine sort of having to look in the mirror and wondering, do I look like my bio mom? Do I look like my bio dad? Like where does all of this come from? And so the other sort of impact you'll see, just by way of an example, because I'm going to harp on this issue a little bit throughout this presentation, is consider medical situations. Like I will open this to anyone. When you go to a doctor's office and you fill out initial paperwork, what is one of the first things you have to disclose or talk about? So people will ask you, right? Is anyone in your family have a history of XYZ condition?
Yeah.
So for an adoptee, if we're not diligent about getting that type of information, an adoptee may not know. It may not have access to a very important element of their history and their health that could impact them throughout their lifespan. So adult adoptees, I will tell you, through a separate process, do come back and ask for information and ask for information to be disclosed. And so one of the things that we do and have used here with great success is a birth parent information sheet that really gets at all of these things. It's an especially powerful tool for us to use with incarcerated parents because we have had a 100% response rate. So making sure we're getting this information from maternal sides of the families and paternal sides of the family. So when it comes to TPR, certainly you don't have to read all of this. This is an excerpt from the code. And so really what I want to highlight is that we have a clinical role to play in an adoption process, but we also have a legal role to play in the adoption process. And preparing the family is important, but we as an agency also have to make sure that we have enough evidence of our efforts in the foster care case to support the court granting our request to terminate parental rights and change the goal to adoption. TPR trials are brutal. That's really the best way I can say it. All of the nitty gritty of what happened in a case comes to light here. Everything a worker did or didn't do comes under scrutiny. And it's also true for parents, which is a really painful experience as a worker to kind of have to get on the stand and talk about all the things a parent didn't do. Many of whom you've developed relationships having worked with them for a year, generally at this point in time, if not more. So every detail of the abuse and neglect gets reopened, each missed visit, each excuse, every missed appointment, every positive drug screen, the mental health issues, that all comes up and comes out. These hearings have testimony, they have witnesses, they have providers on the stand, they have workers on the stand, and they can take hours. Having been in several of those, I will tell you, me as one witness, being a case carrying worker, I testified for 8 hours in circuit court on a TPR over a course of 2 days. So I just wanted to sort of give some context that when we say TPR, there's a lot that's involved there, as it should be, because it's a very serious and permanent decision that is getting made, and the judge needs to make a very informed decision. So when I reference these 3 court tiers, the initial TPR is held in juvenile and domestic relations court, which is where our other routine foster care hearings are held. If we are granted TPR, a birth parent has 30 days to appeal that decision, and then it levels up to circuit court. The circuit court experience is basically a retrial of the case, witnesses, new testimony, it's before a different judge. The evidence you entered in JDR can come forward. And again, if you prevail, this department gets the TPR upheld, bio parents then have another 30 days to appeal to the Court of Appeals. The Court of Appeals is a little bit different in that there's no new evidence, but our county attorney writes a brief that's submitted about the case, and the hearing and the materials go up for review. The Court of Appeals process will add about a year to the permanency timeline for kids in care. It takes a very long time when cases get appealed to the Court of Appeals.
So I have a question. I heard recently that almost every case went to appeal. Is that true, or just, I don't know, what's the stat?
So no, I don't have a good stat on that, but Karen, that's a good question. Obviously the cases where we have permanent entrustments, which we have quite a few of those, and Phyllis has signed off on a number of those fairly recently, there isn't a need for appeal because the bio parents are in support of as much as they can be. of the adoption goal. I think that's where our numbers of kinship and relatives that adopt also plays into that decision, because, you know, for a biological family to know their aunt is adopting their kid is a different experience than a biological parent potentially with a resource foster parent who they don't have a relationship with in the same way. But we do have a fair enough that go to circuit court. We have a couple that have gone to the Court of Appeals, and we have one that's sort of stuck there right now. So it happens, but I would say it's not the majority of our cases
Okay.
by any.
All right, thank you.
In approaching TPR and after, it really is a time of holistic assessment. The assessment skills of adoption-focused workers are crucial, and foster care workers as well. And it's really sort of thinking about, like, what is the plan going to be? This 20 Things Adopted Kids Wish Their Adoptive Parents Knew is a great book, and we provide it to pre-adoptive parents on a regular basis, just to let you know what's on this slide. The adoption team spends a lot of time and energy thinking about and training the whole unit, doing a lot of cross training on thinking critically about adoption placements. One of the things we have to consider is, although a child is placed with a foster parent for foster care, it does not necessarily mean that that's the best adoptive placement. And so it's really important, especially for infants and young children, from an attachment lens, to really be thinking about where they are and are they well placed in foster care. For example, like, we want to make every effort when a younger child, but really all children come into foster care, to have them with a family member or a foster parent that would at least consider adoption, to avoid unnecessary moves and delays later. But that doesn't mean that that family has to be committed to it or agree to it from day one. So when I'm talking about some of the things that, like, we as a team have to consider in terms of family dynamics, I will tell you the attitude of the family saying, yes, we want to adopt, is critical. Do they respect the biological family? Do they respect the biological family culture? Are there other children in that prospective adoptive family's home? How do those kids feel about an adoptee joining their family? Are there adult children of the prospective adoptive parents, and how do those children and grandchildren feel about an adoptee coming into the picture and becoming a permanent member of this family? How does the family feel about connection by may not be in care, and siblings who may or may not be placed together? But really, at the core of it, we want and we need to ask, like, does this adoptive family really delight in the child that they have in their home? Because we firmly believe, and I said this in a child welfare meeting this week, it's a privilege to, and not a burden, to have our kiddos placed with them. So the other sort of telltale piece you're looking at when determining fit is the language perspective adoptive families are using. Are they really talking about this as a lifelong commitment, or sort of giving you indicators that we'll do this until this youth is 18? Do they see value, again, in that sibling connection and biological extended family connection? Because our kids come not just with mom and dad, but they've got aunts, uncles, cousins, second cousins. So, like, what is the feeling of inclusivity that could be there, even if the biological parents aren't in a place to maintain a safe relationship potentially post-adoption? And finally, really, is it realistic for this family to commit to adopt? Looking at the age of foster families, age of kiddos, and a lot of other factors about, have they really considered it? Because they may really want to, but is that really truly the best fit that's going to be able to meet this adoptee's need throughout the lifespan? One thing that sort of is a whole other beast to tackle and wrangle with is, if kids aren't in adoptive homes, there's a recruitment process, because kids who have a goal of adoption, we have an obligation to find them an adoptive family. And if they aren't where they are going to be, we have an obligation to look for a family and match them. We do have partnerships with agencies that assist us with that, but that selection responsibility and transition responsibility is ours. And when I say ours, it's really the worker in conjunction with the supervisor. And we have to use a team approach. I talk about this internally, meaning utilizing each other. These decisions are really hard to make in just a supervisor-supervisee dyad. We have to maximize. There's a lot of adoption expertise in this unit, which is a huge asset, and part of the reason why the adoption program has run so smoothly over the last couple of years. that sort of brings me down to briefly wanting to touch on this contact with biological family. Like there isn't an open adoption per se, but we really from the start of a case try and make sure foster parents who adopt a lot of the time have open dialogue with biological family and birth parents, because that's what's going to help us be successful in supporting the return home goal. But it also sets a more positive foundation for adoptees if adoption ends up being the outcome. So we need to think about like, what does that contact look like? Because up until TPR, bio parents could be visiting still on a very regular basis with their kids, like once a week. So is that sustainable post-adoption? What's the comfort level of the adoptive parents? What's the department steps out of the picture? And how can we begin transitioning those people or everyone's sort of expectations around that? This can be formal agreements or informal agreements between adoptive parents and biological parents. There's post-adoption contact and communication agreements, which are a more formal sort of written plan. And I've seen the post-adopt contact look as frequent as you're invited to holidays and birthdays and visits to, you know, there are separate email addresses. A bio parent can email as many times as they want. Or, you know, there's PO boxes to send letters and photos and those sorts of things, depending on what the issues were, what the challenges are, and sort of where people are currently, and then in the longer term. One of the sort of fun things, but hard things to do is all the prep work we have to do with our child or youth for adoption. These three are some great books that we use for the younger kids. This is something that should be happening with the adoptee and not something that should be happening to them. So it's important to remember where the kid fits in it. It's not just all about the grown-up stuff, like it really is the kid at the core of this. So please, let's not forget that and put as much time and energy there as we do anywhere else. My main point in talking about language and resources is that you can talk about adoption to a child of any age. There are so many great books and videos and card games and Sesame Street, you name it, that really talk about adoption in a digestible way and at different developmental, you know, ages. In terms of unpacking the no, like when we ask a child just if they want to be adopted, what might you think the first answer that comes out of a kid's mouth might be? No, I don't want to be adopted. And so if we stop there, we're missing an opportunity to dig a little deeper. So I'm going to ask, and then I promise I will stop talking rapid fire for a second. What is one reason one of you might think a kid says they don't want to be adopted?
I just think it would be scary to the unknown. And there's always that relationship with their family, I would think.
Yep. Thank you. That's exactly it, right? So some of the common misperceptions that we get to when a kid says no and really needing to understand what does that actually mean is I've heard kids say, it means I have to change my name. No, it doesn't. I've heard them say, my mom won't be my mom anymore. My dad won't be my dad anymore. I'll never get to see my family again. Some kids have said, I have to forget my family. I have to forget where I came from. They'll be mad at me. It means my family isn't my family anymore. Those are all real things that come up from our kids. And so I say that in preparation, it's a time for asking questions, but it's also a time for listening. Really listening to understand, not to respond and to convince anyone, either a foster family to adopt or for a child to feel a certain way about the prospect of being adopted. Really asking these kids, how do you feel? What are you wondering about? What are you excited about? What are you worried about? Adoption is bittersweet. There is a lot of joy, but there is grief and there is loss in this process. And we as the adults have to hold space for that. We do work on life books, which are visuals, and sort of the best analogy I can give you is a scrapbook that sort of highlights and documents a kid's time and care. Some agencies do a better job of this than others, but think about, like, I've encouraged workers, you know, take a picture of every home that a kid has been in, and hopefully it's one, but you all know that's not always true. right? What schools did they attend? What was the name of their road? What's one thing they remembered? Were there other kids? And like all of those types of things to document those chapters of an adoptee's life or any child in foster care's life and journey. We do work closely with CAF and the other TFC, so the treatment foster care agencies, people, places, you know, UMFS, DePaul, most commonly in this area. And, you know, the case managers, you know, our workers try and work with them because these are big conversations and these aren't conversations you can have one time and everything sticks. So it really is an ongoing dialogue and process. So it's better when you have that team approach and everybody's sort of consistent in message and understanding. So we're going to get a little bit more into the nitty gritty in terms of procedural steps. So the blank full disclosure document is one of the documents I had made available to you all, as well as that full disclosure checklist. This is one of the most tedious steps in moving towards adoption, and it's the place where things can get hung up if we haven't done our due diligence on the front end of a case. Essentially, we have to provide to a prospective adoptive family, long story short, everything we know about this child. Everything we know about their routine, their likes, their dislike, their family history, their placement history in foster care, their development, their education, their medical history. We have a responsibility to get birth infant records from whatever hospital they were born at, their medical records, and any reports or assessments that really have happened during their time in foster care. And it really is set to have full transparency. We want any adoptive parent to understand as best they can the child that they're interested in adopting. And so this is most useful, for lack of a better word, if a child is not in their adoptive placement and we're recruiting for, like, we have to provide that information to a family who may not have been a part of the case from day one. We have the same obligation and responsibility to do all of this work, even if the kid has been there from day one. And so we have to make sure that all of that information is provided. We have to redact it, which when we had to do that by hand was a very tedious process. We are blessed to have some software that helps us with redaction of identifiable information about bio-parents and whatnot, anything that could sort of be traced back. It's best practice to do this, but it's also a liability issue. We want to make sure that an adoptive parent doesn't come back later and say, you knew this about this child, but you didn't tell us, you didn't disclose it. We haven't had this happen here, but there have been issues where like other agencies have been subject to lawsuits for not really providing that full disclosure. So you see that the blank document is about 8 pages. Those could get up to 20 pages when workers are really typing in and filling in all of those elements. So it's a difficult one. I'm glad we have to do it. It helps workers get in the frame of reference for like what they're going to need to be typing up in final reports and investigations later on as well. The adoption subsidy. This is a fun program that has taken off and changed a lot just in the 5 years I've been in this position. When I say there are forms, there are at least 16 forms when I counted them up, sort of in preparation for this, from full disclosure onward to get an adoption finalized, that have to be signed, returned, dated, are subject to timeframes by which they must be acted upon, all of those sorts of things. So I've listed the ones that really pertain to this subsidy process. So I'm not sure what your all's context is. In foster care, there's subsidy, there's basic maintenance and enhanced maintenance. There are subsidy payments that foster parents receive for kids that are in their home. And so this subsidy process is really looking at like, what is the financial compensation an adoptive parent and family might be eligible for in order to meet the needs of the child that's in their home. So we start by giving them an information sheet that tries to spell this out in a digestible way. The full disclosure is a piece of this process. The screening tool is our starting point that really outlines what a child might be eligible for. So we go through that screening tool and it covers things like, are they 4E in adoption? Are they CSA in adoption? Are they eligible for Medicaid as an adoptee? Are they eligible for special services? All of those sorts of things, daycare maintenance. It sort of gives us the basic roadmap of this is what this package could look like. Essentially, in adoption, a child must demonstrate a special need. What that means in the adoption world is that a child generally has to have a diagnosis. This is a little bit frustrating if I'm being very candid, because the foster care side of things is moving away from labeling kiddos, right, and over medicating kiddos, but yet there's sort of this criteria on the adoption side that to document that special need, it has to equate to a diagnosis. So that's one thing that could qualify. So like a child that has PTSD diagnosis or an ADHD diagnosis, for example, are common things you see in children that enter foster care. There are different types of agreements that could happen for kids that have congenital defects or hereditary tendencies. Like say a bio parent is bipolar. Well, there's a genetic predisposition there, and that's considered in this adoption subsidy process. Sometimes agreements equate to dollars, sometimes it's $0 amounts, and sometimes you're not eligible for anything in the subsidy if you have a healthy child, particularly under 2. So developmental delays like speech or physical therapy or occupational therapy are not an automatic qualifier. So that's sort of a gist of how far it could go. I could get into the weeds and just do an hour on subsidy alone. But what I will say is families have to apply. There's an application that requires that they disclose like what their income is. They need to break down their expenses because their financial need is a piece of this overall negotiation process. And so what I have on the screen here is a form I created in Excel that workers can use. And you'll see this is an example of a kid that would be 13 or older, because that basic maintenance amount is $721. The VMAT is an assessment tool that we use in foster care, and we do VMATs on kids going to adoption subsidy. And so you see sort of that total maximum. So that 1841 is the maximum that this particular hypothetical kid could receive in subsidy, right? We are required by policy to start these conversations with adoptive parents at this 70% mark. So now we're going in and we're managing this case clinically, and then we have to switch gears, and now we're talking about money. You know, it's a different sort of skill set, and it can be really uncomfortable sometimes and hard to tell a family, no, like this kid doesn't deserve, or you don't get X, Y, and Z when in foster care you got this. So I just highlight there's a lot of friction points here potentially that require a little bit of a nuance and finesse to getting through and having people understand. I will tell you that I've always encouraged workers to ask them, like, what do you need? What do you think you need? Not what do you want? What do you think you need to provide sort of the lifestyle or the things that you would want for this adoptee moving forward? And we have had some parents say, I don't need subsidy. I just need the Medicaid that they qualify for. You have some that are like, I'm good with 50%. You have some that say, I want 100% because I'm putting them on private insurance and I'm doing these specialized lessons and I've got this and I've got that. Like that's the depth of the conversation here, because we have to put all of this information into a package and we have to send it to a state negotiator who reviews it to make sure the decision that we've made is in line with policy before we can execute an adoption assistance agreement. So there's a lot of oversight, there's a lot of policy that drives this, and it all has to be documented. So I know that was a mouthful. I will pause for a second in case anybody has questions a little bit about this initial subsidy piece.
Yeah, I really like your approach to the families, saying, what do you need? And then trying to figure it out. But I'm unclear, where are the funds coming from? Is this a state-run program or?
So Phyllis might be best equipped to say those are federal funds that come down to us, correct? Especially when it's 4E.
If the child has been deemed eligible for Title 4E, which is a federal funding stream for foster care, then the child is eligible for subsidy through the federal 4E funding. But if the child was not eligible for 4E in foster care, then the subsidy comes out of state money. But neither funding stream has a local match. So the subsidy is 100% federal or 100% state. There is still a state subsidy, right, Sarah?
Yes.
Okay.
But I will say they've moved, part of what they've revamped over the years is most kids qualify for that 4E subsidy. It really is our teeny tiny tots that are under 2 at the time an agreement is going to be signed that would not be eligible for 4E.
That's right. I forgot about that change that happened. Yeah, that happened right as I was assistant director. So it's largely federal, Amy.
Once a child goes on subsidy, I will say access to CSA ends. And services that are paid through CSA or on the foster care side can no longer be funded. And this includes the loss of like the case manager from the child placing agency. So the CAF case manager, your People Places case manager, or your DePaul's case manager. So the adoption worker essentially flies solo on the case from this point through finalization. And that can be really challenging because as the adoption finalization approaches, a lot of feelings and behaviors can come up. So it's really a little bit of a bummer to not have sort of that support of another case manager to try and help, mitigate and navigate some of those challenges. These are contracts. So if we have a kid that's 2 that's going on to subsidy, we are on the hook for providing that subsidy at least until that child reaches 18. There's a whole addendum process and rescreening that goes where kids may be eligible from subsidy up until 21. They have to meet criteria, and it's basically like doing this whole subsidy process over again. Families can also come back and say, hey, we want this service. And we have to go through a screening and assessment process to see if it ties back to the original special need at the time the adoptee was adopted. So there's a lot of trying to tie things that may come up later in life back to what was happening at the time the adoptee was adopted. And sometimes we're able to get funding approved through subsidy for services post-adoption. Finalizations, hooray. This is the beautiful time, a wonderful time, most often anyway. It's a legal process, right, with an attorney and the judge. The legal fees, which is nice, of subsidy of adoption are covered by subsidy up to $2,000. So it's really nice that families generally don't incur any legal fees for the adoption process. We've cultivated some really good relationships with attorneys in this community, and we'll give prospective families sort of a list and say, hey, these guys are familiar with our process. You don't have to use them. You could go with somebody else, but see if any of these sort of meet your fancy and they know how it goes and can keep things moving. Finalizations are at circuit court, which is the picture that you see if you haven't been downtown. We have to receive an order of reference once the petition is filed by the attorney. That basically puts us on a 90-day notice. You've got to have your final report of investigation turned in. That final report of investigation is extensive. Like that's the culmination of the adoption case. It's the culmination of the foster care case. And generally at minimum for like an infant, you might be looking at 8 to 10 pages. Not a lot of birth history, not a lot of time in foster care. I've seen these reports and I've written them upwards of 20 pages for kiddos who might be older or have siblings in care, those sorts of things, because it's an extensive and comprehensive social history, not only of the child, but of the biological family and the petitioners. So there are 8 different sections to the report, and I won't go into all of them, but I will tell you that one section is subject of the petition, which is about the child, suitability of the petitioners, which is all about the family that's petitioning to adopt, the condition of the child, like what's their developmental trajectory, separation from natural parents, what's their experience been in foster care, consent, is the department consenting to this petition or do we not want to consent to this petition? Circumstances of the placement, their placement history, how they ended up being with this adoptive family and how is that going? And then the agency's recommendation. Finalizations can occur 2 ways. Some families will opt just to have the judge sign off in chambers and the order is issued and we receive it and there we go. There's also And we've started doing these again. We've had one more in person, a finalization ceremony where families can go into circuit court. It's awesome when they happen. It's probably the least formal hearing that you will have. You can bring family members in, you can take pictures. Judge Higgins does a lot of ours here, but there are other judges that preside over them. And the adoptive parent will have to testify. And if a kid is of an age, she will put the kid on the stand and just ask them, what do you think about your family? And her catchphrase is, I don't divorce families. Are you sure? Which I think is kind of funny. And she will have the kids come up beside her and sign off on their final orders of adoptions. The parents get to do it too. Siblings that may not be being adopted, they get to sign the final orders too. So it's a really inclusive, pretty unique moment in the child welfare world. If you've ever heard the bell ringing downstairs or downtown, the only reason that bell rings is when a child's being adopted. So the bell will ring and the adoptee gets to ring it one time for each year of their age. So a 7-year-old would get to ring it 7 times, 13, and so on and so forth. So that's a really special moment and a really cool special tradition we have in this community around adoption finalizations. So before I get into some of the phases of adoption, I just wanted to take a minute to talk about how we manage this. I primarily supervise. I have a co-supervisor, Amy Casey, who has a lot of adoption expertise and experience and is my partner in crime. I have a senior worker, Kayla Morris, right now, who has adoption specialization, although she can do other things and has. Janie Hunter has been here for 40 plus years and is part-time, but she's got an adoption caseload. Rashawn Smith is one of our more administrative support persons. Amanda Hodgson is another senior worker. So these are the smaller adoption team, but everybody in this unit has a case with a goal of adoption. So we have to use a team approach. I pull together the adoption team twice a month. One of those is to go over our administrative stuff, another to hold room for consultations, problem solving, process improvement. Do we need to tweak what we're doing? How can we get to permanency faster? There's a formal transfer process that makes sure cases are in the shape they need to be to go to an adoption specialized worker. Permanency partners, Phyllis will chuckle a little. This is much like the concurrent planning workers from back in the day, resurrected with a little 2.0 spin on it, to help workers who are going through this process for the first time be partnered up with a seasoned worker that can help push them along and push along some of the nuance of subsidy. We're doing unit trainings. We have foster care think tanks with our new staff as forums to talk about new policy, best practice, how do we do this? And then we develop those adoption guides that were also sent to you guys in advance of this presentation. So this is the fun stuff, not that the other stuff wasn't fun. But this is a presentation we put together for all staff last year. November is National Adoption Month, so we generally put together one of these each November. Just sort of bring it alive for our agency, but I have an opportunity to do that with you today. So I won't belabor this point, and I've sort of touched on it already. There are different types of adoptive families. You have that resource parent, which is that foster parent who didn't have any prior relationship with the adoptee. You have a kinship parent, which is a blood relative of some sort to that adoptee. And then you have a fictive kinship parent, who is not a blood relative, but is somebody who had a prior relationship with the family or the child. So think godparents, think neighbors, think coaches. We've had teachers adopt. Those sorts of relationships fall into that fictive kinship category. So this little one, granted these are a year old, so some of these ages have shifted. I did not go through and update all of them. But he was adopted in fictive kin by his biological mother's godmother. Navon was adopted by a resource family, but she's a really interesting story. She is one of her biological mother's 9 children. Some were in care with the city, but we also had her younger sibling who just recently got adopted. That resource family and this resource family are connected, so these siblings get to know each other. Navon's resource family is also connected to another sibling of hers in New Jersey, as well as some of the others in the local area. So it is a situation where we have siblings separate, but like they will get to know some of their biological siblings in the adoption world, which is really cool. These two were adopted together by a resource family. We have quite a bit of success keeping siblings together, which is something I'm very proud of. Yeah. This adoptive family in particular is great. They were a joy to work with. These are two siblings that were able to be adopted together by a fictive kinship parent. This was really significant. Devin was autistic and had a really high level of need. So it was super important to keep these kids together, and they actually are doing quite well. So again, another celebration of siblings being able to be adopted together. This little ham was placed with his half brother through fictive kinship. His half brother was adopted through our agency a number of years prior. So he was placed with his half brother, and they were adopted by the same adoptive family and have a relationship with the biological mother. These three were fictive kinship with their school bus driver. Very high level needs, but had a good relationship and a prior relationship with the birth parents too. But all three were able to be adopted together. Shout out to the single mama, because she is rocking it. They're doing really well. Ayumi and Riley, yep, our paternal siblings. They are with different relatives, but those relatives know each other. So these kiddos get to see each other as well. And both of them are finalized at this point. Declan, we had permission to do his entire name, but he was adopted by a resource family. So a foster family that had him. He had one placement his entire time in foster care, which is awesome. Yep, Omari was adopted by family friends. So again, that sort of kinship fictive foster care situation. These three are a special story too. They were in care with us for a very long time, 3.5+ years, adopted by their aunt, but they are doing well too. There were lots of challenges on this case, but everybody stuck in it, and I'm so tickled that they were able to be adopted. And this little one, he was adopted too by a resource family. So I wanted this visual to be in here, and we did this in all staff too, that sort of shows fictive kinship versus that pool resource family and our kinship numbers. So what that really means is that 72% of the children that were adopted in 2020 were adopted by people they knew, either biological family or people who had a prior relationship with them and their family. And I just think that that's astounding when we think about adoption outcomes. So it really is indicative of the hard work from child welfare from the start, from our family finding, from the time these cases come into CPS to the diligence and concurrent planning, continued engagement, to where we sort of come at the far end of the spectrum in the adoption world. I did update this, that we have 38 children right now in foster care with a goal of adoption. And so we're continuing to work and move those cases. We've finalized 2 this calendar year so far, and we have quite a few others that are close. So 2021 should be a good year for permanency for the children of Albemarle County as well. Again, I touched on this briefly, that we continue to serve through 2 primary workers this post-adoption caseload. And I just wanted to highlight too, again, that adoption is bittersweet. There are a lot of things that are wonderful about it. We sometimes only see the nice side of adoption, the celebratory side, but there's a lot of loss that's in that as well, that we have to acknowledge and embrace and accept and recognize as well. This I will send you in a video afterwards, because I don't want to mess with trying to do my audio. This is a little bit about Adoption Month, but from the adoptee's perspective, and talking about the importance of, well, yes, we want to celebrate and sort of pat ourselves on the back, really thinking about what it means to be adopted and what that experience is like and what those challenges are. So this is a little excerpt from a documentary that was a good one. So again, adoption is a journey that lasts a lifetime. And so our post-adoption program, I don't say this nastily, is sometimes overlooked. There are 86 kids that are being managed over 2 workers' caseloads right now, to varying levels of need. to varying levels of, investment in time. A lot of times, the post-adoption world is crisis driven. We're called when there is a significant issue. So I just wanted to make sure that was touched on as well. And I think that's all I have, as if that wasn't enough.
That was very good. Thank you so much.
Sure. Thank you for sticking with me through that. I know that was a lot, so I'm happy to talk, ask questions, answer questions, or whatever might be helpful.
I have another question. Are you still doing adoption searches? Is that still a mandate of the agency?
Yeah, when an adult adoptee wants to get information, yep, there's a process. I get quite a few calls and have to direct them. That application has to go through the state, and then the state remands it down to the locality that was responsible for finalizing the adoption. So either an adult adoptee can say, hey, I want information, non-identifying, or like, I want to figure out who my birth parents are. I want to figure out if I have any siblings. And so we get that request in the adoption record, and we have a responsibility to try and look for those folks. It's a little bit tricky when we find them, but they don't consent to have that information shared. And we have to deny an adult adoptee's request, even though I know where their mom is. And I know, like, you have to respect the confidentiality on both sides. It's quite amazing though, when you can reconnect. And I did that as a senior worker. Was able to put adult siblings together, and they used to send me pictures of their vacations together, and those sorts of things. And sometimes people just want their medical information.
Yeah, I was curious because of the internet being so more open than it was 10 years ago. And that was one of the reasons for my question of, people have more access themselves.
I think that that's true, and things are trending that way. If you want to be found, you're going to be found. It doesn't mean you're going to respond. But also, I think it speaks to the level of transparency we have in our adoption practice here, and the development of foster families and adoptive families to be open and honest about the story and who the biological family is, that a lot of times there's an organic connection, either with the biological parent or grandparents or cousins, that are sources of information. So people don't have to go through that formal process because they have access to it in a natural framework.
Right. Thanks.
Sure.
I just wanted to pause for a minute. Sarah, Mary McIntyre joined us while you were presenting. Mary is the representative from Rio. Right, is that what's called? Rio District. Ned Galloway is her supervisor. So
yeah, hi, I'm so sorry. I'm really bummed that I missed the first part of your presentation. I kept getting an error from my Zoom, and I had to download a new Zoom, and then the link wasn't working, and I was really saying some bad words. But I'm so impressed. You know so much. Like, this presentation was just so detailed, and I loved the materials we got ahead of time, the adoption guide for adoptive families, and then the one for workers. I learned a lot from that. So thank you.
Well, thank you all.
We'll send her PowerPoint out.
Yeah, I will.
So you'll get to see it, Mary.
Thank you.
I do want to say thank you, for reading those materials. I was hoping you all would review them because it's a lot to cover, but it gives you a good framework and a point of reference. So, yeah.
I just have one other question. On your last slide, you said there's 2 people working on, I think it was 86 post adoptions. Do they also work on, people that are currently looking to be adopted? That's a lot of people.
They do. But so so post-adoption is really busy when it's really busy. There are some families that don't require really any attention. We have to send yearly annual affidavits out to all of our families for subsidy and financial. So there's some like administrative and OASIS data entry updates. But when a family calls and says, hey, my kiddo's in crisis, like, we have a responsibility to work that case and case manage it, even when they're out of jurisdiction. So it becomes tricky when you have a number of them coming up at the same time and a worker has their own caseload. Like, I carried one, like, I knew the case, so it just made sense for me to take it. But you are then in fact, you are then in working with a case manager, you are then in a team meeting, you are then managing a service and trying to get it approved. You are then responsible for reporting back on that. So there can be a lot of involvement. Again, sort of unfortunately, most of the post-adoption activity is crisis related. So sometimes we have kids that are going to residential or something's really not working. But we do try and maximize. There's an adoption consortium. So there are some clinical services available through the state for post-adoption and adoption support. But it can get quite busy, and there are other benchmarks in post-adoption. Anytime a kid changes age group, like we have to do some updates. When kids are approaching 18, that's probably one of the busier times because we have to go through this whole extensive review process to see whether their subsidy can continue to 21. So generally it's manageable, but we have people to sort of share the weight and say who has capacity here to try and take on whatever might be coming up post-adoption.
Great report. Great report. I'm amazed that 72% of the children are placed with people that they know. That's a big plus.
Yeah, we're really proud of that. I mean, again, I think it speaks to just this belief in our whole child welfare spectrum about family, about preventing foster care wherever we can, and family engagement, quite frankly, and being diligent with our effort process and family finding and all of that. You know, we have anywhere between like 28 to 36% of all of the kids in foster care are in kinship foster care placements, kinship or fictive kin. So we do a good job on the foster care side of really pushing towards that goal. And when that drives your philosophy, you tend to have pretty good outcomes on the back end.
So I'd like to connect the dots here in a specific way. Several years ago, the Board of Supervisors supported our request for funding a position that we call Family Finder. And at that time, the primary argument that I was making before the board was that this would assist in helping kids avoid coming into care, thereby reducing our CSA costs. This presentation highlights that the family finding actually benefits even after the child comes into care, because the family finding efforts at the beginning are what enables foster care to place those children with either fictive or non-fictive kin. So the family finding function is across the spectrum, and I'm very grateful for the board's support in funding that position. And then subsequently we actually got another one, right, Sarah? Don't we have 2 family finders now?
Well, Kim's senior position in terms of FPM coordinator has morphed into some family finding support, but Andrea's position really is the primary family finding.
Okay.
Great.
Jenny, you're back.
Yes, Mary was talking about how she was having trouble with Zoom, and then I started not being able to see, and then I couldn't hear, and then I got kicked out and I couldn't get back in. So I would be back, but I'm back. Sorry about that.
Does anybody have any other questions or comments for Sarah?
I'm just wondering, Sarah, where are you going next?
Thank you for asking. I am taking a position with the state, the Virginia Department of Social Services, as a permanency practice consultant. So I'll still be doing foster care and adoption work, but I'll be a consult for about 8 local agencies actually in the central region.
Yeah, the only bummer is that that's not our region.
That was my next question.
This would feel a lot better if she was going to be our consultant.
The trek to Roanoke was just a little too far.
Actually, should we be advocating that the case managers stay with the case? As you had said, is that something that you would like us to advocate for, or?
I think if we could influence the funding requirements around it, it would be helpful. There's one case I can think of that sibling group had such a high level of need that when presenting it to the negotiator, we said we need her for short term, 3 more months, or this isn't going to work. And here's why. and we had to be very explicit. But it is a little disruptive when that case manager who has been with the case generally from start sort of isn't there anymore. I will say a lot of our agencies are wonderful about if there needs to be a carryover visit or there needs to be a carryover meeting, like the case manager will still come back and do some of that. But it is hard to sort of fly solo in some of those delicate moments. So I don't know what influence we could have, but I think it would certainly be preferable from my standpoint if the adoption worker maintains some case management support.
Yeah, I guess that kind of piggybacks on my thought, or I'm piggybacking on this. My typical questions when we receive a presentation is, what do you need that you're not getting or that you don't have, and what could we push for locally that would make the biggest impact to make your job easier or improve outcomes for you?
Thank you for that. I'm going to think on my feet a little bit because I didn't quite anticipate that question. I think one of the things too is just resources, right? I have 2 primary workers that sometimes have to take on foster care stuff, but also, you know, there's a lot of expertise that comes into adoption, right? So it's hard for new workers, and we have a lot of them who are new to foster care, to learn foster care and then learn adoption, or to learn those 2 programs simultaneously. So in a perfect world, I would want and would hope for some more staff that could form sort of like a more of a distinct adoption unit to allow us to run that, to train, to cross-train, to have capacity, because I think that would move our kids to permanency quicker. It wouldn't take us as long in some of those areas. I think adoption competent resources, clinicians, materials, groups, we benefit a little bit from some of the stuff coming down from Northern Virginia, but there's a real need for services and access to services that have an adoption focused lens in this community. So those are the 2 major things I think. Phyllis, you know adoption work, you've been in it. Is there anything that you can think of that we could use more of?
I echo the sort of the service resources in the community, and certainly one of the avenues to advocate for that is through our the community policy and management team. Although it's largely CSA, it has a program subcommittee, and so we go through a process of identifying service gaps in the community. I think that across the county there's need for staff. The resources are limited, so I certainly appreciate that. I do think that in the foster care adoption world, there is a correlation between the number of staff and how quickly we can achieve permanency. All that said, I think that there are also areas in the judicial system which could really assist us, and I'm not sure where the advocacy is there, but as Sarah indicated, this process is so legally driven that judges, can either help or actually hinder the processes. But a lot of the challenges actually come at the state level, particularly, Sarah mentioned the funding. That's really a state level issue. That's not a local level.
The other plug I would make, Phyllis, now that you've said that, is, in thinking about our post-adoption world, staff, to make that a little more robust, we are responsive and have to be reactive as opposed to being proactive. So if there could be dedicated staff to sort of keep an eye on and be reaching out to families ahead of time to check in a sort of a more meaningful way. Like, we do the best that we can, but that's really hard to do when you have a caseload of 15 and you've got 40 post-adoption caseloads that you're sort of there and they're okay, right? So if we had a post-adoption position that could be reaching out and checking in on a regular basis, distributing resources, promoting sort of things that are available in the community, support groups or whatever, we do the best that we can, but I think that's an area we could improve if we had somebody sort of really dedicated to that type of work.
Thank you.
Thank you for asking. I appreciate the opportunity to respond.
Are there other questions? Thank you, Sarah. That was really, really great. And it was a whole bunch of information, but I think you did a great job trying to cover it for us in the time that we have. And we wish you the best of luck.
Thank you so much. I appreciate your time and attention and for the opportunity. It means a lot.
Thank you very much. Mary, since you had trouble joining us, we did talk about the information items, but did you have specific questions that you wanted to ask?
I'm opening up my notes. Let me look really quickly.
Okay.
Thank you for asking, since I have a history of questions.
That's a good thing.
You know what? I can't find it at the moment. I will email if I do. How about that? Is that okay, Phyllis, if I email you?
Absolutely.
Thank you. I don't want to waste too much time.
Okay, great. Thank you. And so we will, Phyllis, you'll get us something to look at for a message out to the board.
I will.
By the
And
way, I meant to ask, sorry, Jenny, Phyllis, when is your last day?
My last day in the office is June 25th, but my last day of employment is June 30th.
Okay.
So we will be together again in May, and then we'll still have you for June, May and June, right, Phyllis?
Yep.
Okay.
Not rid of me yet.
I don't think we want to be rid of you, but we'll work with the transition.
Great.
All right. Well, I think that's it, and we'll see everyone again and be together again. I assume probably on Zoom still in May.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you, Sarah.
Everyone, enjoy the nice weather. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.